Hey folks, one of the questions that I get quite a bit with long exposure photography is how do you know how long to set the shutter speed? And it's actually really simple. See? Totally simple, right? Okay, maybe not. But don't panic. You do not have to know this chart, memorize this chart, or download this chart or anything like that. So I just want you to notice something on the left side here when it comes to the ND filter naming system. And this is a very common mistake when people start looking for neutral density filters is they figure an ND8 is an 8 stop, and it's not. It's 3 stops of light. How you use this chart, if you decide to use this chart, God forbid, but anyway, you get your regular exposure. So no numbers, no calculations, no nothing. Just aim the camera at your scene and get the shutter speed that gives you a proper exposure. So say that shutter speed is 1/60th of a second for whatever it is that you're photographing. You look in your bag and you say, all right, I've got a 3-stop filter. So if I put that filter on, my shutter speed turns into an eighth of a second. And I've got maybe 8 stops, or maybe I have a 10 stop. And if I've got a 10 stop, then my shutter speed turns into 16 seconds. That's how long exposure times are calculated. But thankfully, there's an app for that. Oh my goodness, there's actually a ton of apps for that. So here's just a couple of examples. I've been using ND Timer on iOS for years and years, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So I just keep using it. No need to update to something newer. And ND Filter Expert is one of the ones that you can get off of Google Play. So definitely do a little bit of research and figure out what you want to use, what's easiest for you to use. I definitely look for something that is simple in the fact that you plug in the exposure, and if you have one filter, that's great, but have at least 2 filters available within the app. I think most apps do this, but just make sure before you download. All right, here's a little example in the field. So this is my normal exposure in the field. So just straight up shot, my histogram looked good, and my shutter speed was 1/30th of a second. So when I put that actual number into the exposure setting for this shot, so that's where I start. And if I have, say, a 5-stop filter in my bag, the resulting number up here, that's how long my shutter speed's going to be. And if I can stack another filter on top of it, so I've got 8 stops, I've got a 10 stop, that gives me about 35 seconds. That's not very much. So if I take that 35-second exposure, it actually worked decently for the water, but I didn't get the blur in the clouds that I wanted. I needed the exposure to be longer. The scene changed just a little bit, and I ended up taking a 1/13th of a second shot. So I'm going to take that number and plug it into my exposure setting again. So 1/13th of a second. And I know that I've got, again, the 5-stop, the 8-stop, but I'm going to go straight to the 10-stop filter and see what the number gives me. Now, this gave me 1 minute and 18 seconds. This app, all of these apps are general for the average 10-stop filter. You're going to get some fluctuation, and I have learned over time that whatever number this comes up with, specifically for my 10-stop filter, I'm going to have to add a little extra time, because every time I plug in the number that they give me and I do a 1 minute and 18 second exposure, it ends up being too dark. So just take those numbers with a grain of salt. So I ended up with a 95-second exposure, which gave me the blur in my foreground, it gave me the blur in my sky, and it just was blind luck that the movement of the clouds happened to be at a diagonal, which works absolutely beautifully for compositional purposes. But this is more of the look that I was aiming for, and that's why I went for the longer exposure instead of just the 35-second exposure. So it takes some time and some experimentation, but I think just understanding how you get from the original shot to a long exposure using those apps, it just makes it so much easier. Well, I hope this helped you guys out, and if you want any more photography advice for landscape photographers in particular, check out this playlist right here, and I've also got some bird photography in there as well. You guys have a great day.